Well, Johnny, that's a good question.
So you can be seen really easily.
I look tall.
What is a Gyopo?
What did I say before?
You mean, what did I say before?
What did I say before? A person that was raised overseas.
Gyopo is an overseas Korean, and I'm an overseas Korean who returned to Korea to live and teach.
Gyopo is a Korean descent that's living abroad, that has lived abroad in another place, and yeah.
How has life been for you as a Gyopo here in Korea?
Definitely a lot easier than I thought it would be. Yes. When I visited years ago, it was a bit more difficult because when you're younger, you tend to find it difficult when you know you don't fit in. You just feel the difference, and the people know it as well. But since I'm older and I'm more accepting about the differences, I feel that it's easier than it was before.
It has its challenges, but it has its rewards. You feel like you're straddling two worlds a lot of the time, but that's okay. A lot of my heroes do the same. So
I love it now, but 7 years ago when I moved here, I didn't really enjoy it at first.
You've been exposed to Korean culture as well as British culture, right? So do you have any experiences, anything to say regarding
Similarities or differences?
more of differences, like things that kind of you just encountered, you're like, oh wow, that's different?
Oh yeah. Too many things. But they're all positive. There are positive things about Korean culture, positive things about British culture. For example, there's one thing where I was really confused when I first came to Korea, why it was so important to call people to say something. Like if you have something important to say, in Korea you need to call that person.
Right.
But in England, it's a lot more polite if you write it out. Like you put it in an email or you text someone if it's okay to call that person in case they're in another situation where they don't want to be interrupted. But in Korea, you need to call that person. It might be like between older people and younger people, but I was definitely told that it's a lot more polite. If you have something important to say, don't put it in writing.
one time I was coming home from work on the bus, and it was a really crowded bus, and so I was standing in the back when two Mormons walk up to me. And they edge right towards me and they start speaking in perfect Korean. And I can't understand a word they're saying. And I said, I'm sorry, guys, I just can't understand you. And they were very surprised because they thought that they could have a conversation with me and they couldn't.
Growing up in the States, it was pretty interesting for me because my parents had the expectation for me to be a very smart Asian child, like every other Asian family, but they didn't enforce education on me like my friends' parents did. But it was interesting. The difference between my friends and I was that we weren't allowed to speak English in the household. Like my friend's family were like, no, we only speak English in the house, as opposed to my family was like, no, you need to keep your Korean culture, so you speak Korean in the house. Plus you have a grandparent who doesn't speak English at all, so you need to communicate with her.
Right.
Plus my parents didn't speak English at all, so I had to communicate with them speaking in Korean. So I had to keep most of my Korean culture as well as adopt some of the American culture while going to school and meeting friends. And so I grew up with both American and Korean culture.
Some people say that it's very important to learn the mother tongue of your country, right? Especially being a Gyopo. But then some people also feel that since you've lived life in another country that it's okay. So where do you fall on that?
You might not like my answer.
Go for it.
I'm neutral on that one. I had the privilege to learn the mother tongue, my mother tongue, because my parents were pretty conservative and they were adamant that I learnt the language properly, and I went to a Korean church, which meant that I was always exposed to that language.
Properly. I'm sorry.
I had the privilege to learn that language because I was exposed to it. But there are other families where they don't have that privilege.
Right.
And some parents feel it's more important that you adapt to that country that you go to. You know, if you are in Rome, be a Roman. I totally agree with that. So I'm not against the fact that other Korean Gyopos cannot speak Korean. I'm not against that at all because a lot of the Gyopos I've met, Korean Americans, Korean British people who can't speak Korean, they have nothing against Korea itself.
Right.
Yeah, and they always want to learn the language. So I think that's what's important is attitude.
I totally agree that I should be studying Korean more than I do. I should know a lot more Korean than I do after 19 years here. And it can only help you. They say that kids who are bilingual do better in school, and it helps you to adapt. And it would make my life a lot easier if I spoke more Korean than I do. Agree totally.
I think it's good to have both Korean and English. I think there's benefits to me speaking Korean at the moment because there's things that I can understand on a deeper meaning, like, you know, certain words you just can't transfer from the English language, like nunchi. How do you transfer that into an English, like maybe Sixth Sense, but it doesn't get the essence of it. There's other things like, oh, 느끼해. Like, how do you transfer 느끼해? Like, oh, you're oily, you're greasy, but that doesn't really mean that. It just means like, oh, sleazy, but that doesn't get down to the bottom of it. So I think it's good to have both mother tongue as well as the English because you can understand the culture a little bit more. You can connect with Koreans a little bit more. And I think that was something that I struggled with when I first came is that I couldn't, there was a disconnect between the Koreans and me as an American. And I couldn't connect with them with the Korean side of me because they were expecting me to be so Korean.
Right.
When I wasn't so Korean.
So have you experienced any kind of discrimination at all living in Korea, being a Gyopo?
Very little, but there are incidences like one time I was on the subway and an old drunken man started yelling at me and my friend who was also Gyopo because we were speaking in English and he couldn't understand why. And all he saw were two Koreans speaking something other than Korean and he was upset. So it happens.
Yeah, definitely, especially in the way that I dress. Koreans think I'm very exposed. Like any American would look at me and think that I'm very modest in the way that I dress. But this much cleavage was difficult for my Korean principal and vice principal to see. So those kind of cultural differences were a little difficult.
Okay. So for anyone who is also Gyopo in Korea, or maybe those who are not Gyopo, maybe they're citizens of Korea, they were born and raised here. Do you have anything you want to say or any
Advice?
Yeah.
I think one important advice I would really like to give is just be positive about any experience that you get in Korea, even if you think it's discrimination. I think it all depends on how you respond. That's going to change all the years that you're going to live in Korea. So if you always just receive it with a positive attitude, you'll definitely enjoy living in Korea because there are so many good things in Korea. It's just that you can only find in Korea.
Yeah.
And that can only happen if you just love the country as it is.
I do agree with you.
Just keep up the good work and come back home and travel a lot and just spread the culture around.
You know, whenever you move to a new place, you just have to give it some time. I think you need to have some grace period and some time to get to know each other. And I think that was maybe something that I never kept in mind when I first moved here. And now that I'm finally, you know, well adapted to Korea and I absolutely love it, there's times when I go back to the States and I have a reverse culture shock where I'm constantly like, oh, where it makes me cringe. So you just need to just have an open mind that not all places is going to fit perfectly like a glove. You just need to give and take.
Understand?
Wow, I learned a lot.
어느 교포에 대해서 여러 사람들과 이야기해봤어요. 많은 거 배울 수 있었는데요. 특히 한국말을 배우는 것에 대한 인터뷰는 엄청 흥미로웠어요. 제 비디오 봐주셔서 감사드리고요. 교포 친구들과 이야기해봐주세요. Don't forget to
Like, subscribe.
You guys be cool. Peace.
I love you, Gyopos.